So one of the great things about food is its seasonality, and I get so excited when the spring harvest comes in, and that includes harvest from the sea. These are Dungeness crabs, the pride of the Pacific Northwest. These were shipped to us by our friends at Fathom Seafood. They are a fantastic purveyor of Dungeness crabs. You want to look for live crabs. These actually came in the day before yesterday because I had to do some prep on some of these to make our little lesson plan go properly today. But you want a nice heavy crab, whether it's a blue crab from the Chesapeake Bay or a Dungie or any crabs. You want to feel that they're heavy, that the meat inside there is present. They're in the life cycle of a crab, especially right after shedding and during warm water periods, they tend to be very light in the shell. These are very heavy and dense in the shell. And I have two beautiful crabs here. I'm going to show you how to clean them. I generally account for about one Dungeness crab per person when I'm cooking. And the first thing I want to do is I want to take my little seafood spice blend, and I have a few inches of water back here with a little steamer basket. And I'm going to put 2 tablespoons for every gallon of water of that spice blend. Some people like more. I mean, there are people who are really addicted to Old Bay, and they put a lot more in to create their coeur bouillon, that seasoned water. I prefer to season them after they come out and do things to the crab after, but I do want a couple tablespoons of seasoning in there because you will taste that seasoning mix in the crab. And then crank this back up to high, and the reason that I put that back up to high is that I'm about to put 4 pounds of very cold product into boiling water. So of course it's going to stop boiling, and I want to come back to the boiling point as quickly as possible. Now, once those crabs are in there, right, and they're cooking away, I put the lid on it, and I pay very close attention to when that's boiling again. It usually takes about 4 or 5 minutes for the thermal momentum to come back to boiling, and that's when I start counting my cooking time. If you're steaming and have an elevated basket, right, as opposed to a low basket like I do, you can start the clock almost right away because you're not plunging cold crab into boiling water. A large Dungeness crab, I like to cook for about 25 minutes in steam and then turn the heat off and let them sit and rest in that hot environment for 5 to 10 minutes, then pull them out, cool them at room temperature, and then put them in the fridge. Now, these Dungies have sat overnight. They're nicely chilled. You can actually see some of the protein has come out of the body of the crab. Just like a lobster, that's a good sign that you've reached an internal temperature that is nice and handy. Dungeness crabs, obviously being bigger, some people find difficult to clean. I don't. I'm going to show you a couple things that we can do with them. The most popular, of course, and I'm just removing this small little tail piece there. The most popular way is just to serve them chilled, and there's a really easy way that you can have at this crab. The first thing to do is to go, this is the front of the crab, this is the rear of the crab, is just to go to the rear and pop that shell off. And I want to make sure that as I pop it off, I turn it this way. And the reason is, some people like that liquid, some people like this mustard that you can push into the crab. I'm going to show you something really fun to do for dipping. Everything inside there is edible. Some people like it, some people don't. These are the lungs of the crab. We peel those away. Some people like to rinse their crabs. I do not. The reason is if I rinse my crab, I take away a lot of that fresh, briny seafood flavor. But I peel off these little feelers, and I use my finger to get the rest of that mustard out. I will typically let this sit in a strainer basket, a mesh basket, because I will collect that liquid. I will collect all the other liquid, all the mustard. I don't want pieces of the internal organs or the lungs or the other parts of the crab that are not edible, because they have a bitter flavor, and I don't press down on them, but I want the juices to come off of them because that is wonderful for seafood stock and risotto and different sauces and things like that. And you just want to make sure you take your time and pull all those little extraneous bits of the inside of the crab, little bits of shell off, because you want to make it easy to eat for your guests. Now I set this crab, which has its mustard on the inside. I set that. Let me just peel a little bit of this mustard off. I'm going to set that over a little pot of simmering water. And the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of compound butter. So this is just shallots and lemon zest and parsley and butter, little garlic, shallot, salt and pepper. I'm just going to stick that inside there, and slowly but surely over that little pot of simmering water, that's going to melt. And that is going to be what we dip our crab meat into. Now, once it's melted, you can put this in the center of the table, or two of them, on a little plate. Put the plate in the oven at 225 degrees for 15-20 minutes, and your butter will stay nice and warm throughout your whole dinner. And all we're going to do is you can crack this in the middle, right? Again, any shell that you missed will come off. And let your crab sit for a minute because it's going to drain away some of its juices. And then when you're ready, just place a couple towels down just to absorb any extraneous liquid. You have your crab. Now, there are a couple things that you can do with this. Method number one is to cut through and let people pull the meat out of the legs themselves. This requires people to know how they are eating a Dungeness crab. Not everybody does. I'm going to show you how. It's super, super simple. You always get one at the end that breaks apart. Wow, that's absolutely spectacular. So now you have the claws of the Dungeness crab, and each one has a lollipop of crab meat on it. And you can actually see those thin little filaments of shell with those big lumps of Dungeness crab meat. You see this? Everything has come back to a boil, so I'm going to turn these burners down, and we're going to let those go for 20-25 minutes. Remember I told you keep an eye on your pots? You can actually hear them come back to a boil. I'm going to cut this one so I get a nice lollipop of the meat, and I'll show you what to do with the primary shell there. First things first, the main claw. The main claw, I typically don't cut in lollipop fashion. I just serve it like this. And you can, if you're cleaning the crab, simply break them apart this way. Take this main shell and bend it up and down. It will come apart just like lobster, but it's got a much thinner shell, so you're able to get all of that knuckle meat. You can just separate those little pieces, and using a scissor, simply break the shell so that you can access the meat inside. You may be making a Dungeness crab salad, and you want to preserve all of that fantastic meat, right? Just like cleaning Alaska king crab, just come right down through the shell. If you use a lobster cracker, you're going to put tons of shell into your meat. You really don't want that. You just want to cut down the middle and then use your finger. The meat in the main claw is very, very fibrous, has a much different texture than the meat in these pieces of claw that I'll show you in a second. Stay. The key here, because there is this piece of feathery bone there, is to remove that and then scoop out all these wonderful pieces of meat. This one will just slide right out of there. Very, very elegant and very nice. However, I want to show you what happens when we take a bigger piece of that claw. There is meat in every piece of this Dungeness crab. And by the way, I do save all these pieces to make stock. We're a little nuts about that here at the kitchen studio. But once you've peeled this away and you take a piece of that off, you can use some of the pointy pieces from the tip of the claw to actually go in there and slide out those nice pieces of Dungeness crab. With the larger forearm sections, you can do them with your fingers like this. It's a thin shell. But if you want to take out big, beautiful pieces of meat, these pieces are really the all-stars. You can just poke out these big, beautiful pieces of knuckle meat. It's absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous crab. So this is if you're going to make a crab salad. 2 or 3 of these claws, you can get quite a lot of meat out of them, especially as you go up into the crab itself. The shell is thinner up here. You don't have to worry about cutting your fingers. You can just slide that knuckle meat and claw meat right out of all of those pieces. Now, those lollipops that we were talking about holds the meat that's in the center of the body. And that has, to some people, their taste, the finest meat that there is. All you have to do is gently push and pull with your fingers, and it actually will come apart where those little dividers of papery thin shell are, and you can simply slide that meat right out of the crab. All you do is start at the knuckle end and just push it out. Some people like to use a pick, but I find if you cut the body away with a scissor, all you have to do is push and pull, and you essentially leave the structure behind. The meat was filled up in between those little pieces of papery shell. And this is that sort of prize piece of jumbo lump knuckle meat. Now I have taken all the meat out, and there's no shell at all left in there. And if you're going to do a crab salad, and there is no finer dish in the world than putting about this much meat, about, I don't know, what is that? Half a cup, 2/3 of a cup. Putting that on top of a tiny little bed of lettuce and tomato, cover it with a nice little Russian dressing, a Louis sauce, a remoulade, whatever you like, and just eat that as is. Just a little bit of salt is needed, nothing more. Now, if you look over here, we have our butter almost melted. If I give that a little stir, I am now cooking the butter with the mustard from the crab. I could just eat that all day long. That's the most delicious thing in the whole world. The crab juice, the mustard, the compound butter, and if there's anything better to dip crab into, I don't know what that is. So sometimes at home, I'll steam 4 or 5 of these, put 2 of these shells on the table for people to dip into, and like a real crab picking, just dip in to there. If any crab meat falls in, don't worry, you're gonna get it with a big piece of bread that you use to pull that up and out of. And then you can just sort of eat the crab by pulling the meat out with your mouth. Now, to real crab lovers, that's kind of the only way to go. All the little bits of connective tissue in there. The bigger shell you just discard. The rest you just sort of suck out and get really messy with your friends and have a really good time doing it. And you don't even need a scissor for these little pieces. You can just crack them with your fingers, pull away a piece of shell, pull out the meat, and have a good old crab picking. That was so ridiculously good. Live Dungeness from the Pacific Northwest, one of life's great treats. So you can do it that way. Dip lots of bread in there, it gets super, super messy. You can, if you like, serve cleaned meat if you really love your guests and you want to clean a lot of meat, and then pour some of that over it at the table. Super nice. I'm going to wash my hands. I'm going to show you a secondary way to cook this. It's a twice cooked wok dish. It's my salt and pepper shrimp recipe that's on the website at andrewzimmern.com, and I've just adapted it for crab. Let me wash my hands. Our oil is hot. We'll set this aside and we'll show you how to do that recipe.